All right, so in this lesson, we are going to talk about how to find the midpoint of coordinates, okay? And the first thing we're going to talk about are the coordinates on a number line, which are a bit more simple because your number line coordinates are just one single number versus the coordinate plane where you have the x and y value. Okay, so I've kind of drawn a number line. If you have your numbers a and b, m is representing the midpoint, okay? And to find the midpoint is pretty easy. It's an average, so we're just going to add them and divide by 2 because there's two numbers. So if you think of the midpoint as an average, all we're doing is finding that mean or that average. So we're going to take the value of a plus b and then divide it by 2, and you have what number is the midpoint. A and b keep their values. So if a is negative or b is negative or both, you would add negative numbers here. So for an example, if I have a number line, and we are at the point -3 and 10, and we want to find that midpoint. To find the midpoint, we are simply going to take -3 plus 10 and divide that by 2. -3 plus 10 is 7, divided by 2 is 3.5. So that midpoint is the positive 3.5, okay? So that is pretty simple. But when we're talking about finding a midpoint with coordinates, we're also talking about what about on that coordinate plane? So now we have to find the midpoint of two coordinate points. If I have two coordinate points, my first coordinate point is going to have an x and a y, and I put a little 1 behind that to denote this is my first x and my first y. Your second coordinate point is your second x and your second y. I want to point out that these 1s and 2s mean nothing in terms of mathematical operations. You're not going to multiply, add, subtract, anything like that. They're just there to simply say first x, first y, second y. Okay, so basically to find the midpoint, okay, we are going to find the average of the x's to find the x value of our midpoint. So we would add the x values together and again divide by 2, and that will give us the x value of our midpoint. And then to find the y value of our midpoint, we're going to average the y's. So you would add the two y's together, y1 plus y2, and simply divide by 2. So a lot like what we did on the number line, just we have to do it for each coordinate point. So if I have the coordinate point 1, 1, and then a second coordinate point of 3, 4, and I need to find the midpoint, I'm going to have to average my x's and average my y's. What might be helpful, some of you won't need to do this step, but some of you might, is to name. This is my first x, my first y, second x, second y. Not necessarily something everybody has to do, but for certain people who like to really look at that formula, it kind of helps you with what to plug in. So now the midpoint is simply the average. Add my two x's, so 1 plus 3, divided by 2. And the y value of my midpoint is going to be averaging my y's. So 1 plus 4 divided by 2. 1 plus 3 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 1 plus 4 is 5. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So there's the midpoint of those coordinates, the coordinate point to 2.5. So as long as you take your time and make sure that you are just plugging your numbers in correctly, and of course understand the difference between your x's and y's, this is a fairly simple thing to find. Okay, but of course there's always that twist. You're not always just going to find the midpoint. There are times they'll give you the midpoint and give you one of the endpoints, and you have to find the other endpoint. So you're going to kind of work with the mean in reverse. So for example, if I'm told that the midpoint is the coordinate point -2, 1, and my other endpoint, which I can label A and B, S and T, X and Y, you know, that doesn't matter. But let's say I have 2 points A and B. I know the midpoint between A and B is -2, 1, and I know that A is the coordinate point, -5, 7. I need to find the other coordinate point. I need to know what is that X and Y value. Okay, what am I missing here? So if you use that midpoint formula, we're going to plug in what we know. So I like to find X and Y separately. In order to find the X value of B, what we need to do is use that formula. So the midpoint was found. So -2, do it the other way. -2 was found by adding the two x values and dividing by 2. So adding the x value of -5, and then of course that unknown x value. So I'm taking, just like before when I defined the midpoint, I'm taking the first x value plus the second x value, divide by 2, and that gives me the midpoint. Except this time I know the midpoint and I know one of the x values, I'm finding the other x value. This is just a simple equation that you can solve at this point. Order of operations in reverse. I'm going to multiply by 2 to cancel out the division of 2. Of course, balance my scale. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. I now have -5 plus x equals -4. Now, to get rid of the addition, I add the opposite. Add a +5 to each side, and the x value is 1. So the x value of my missing coordinate is 1. So that is 1. Now I need to find the y value of my missing coordinate. And I'm going to set up the same thing. Remember, I'll draw a line between these just so there's some separation. Remember that the midpoint formula said add your two y's, divide by 2, and that gives you your midpoint. So again, I know one y, I don't know the other, but I know the midpoint. So again, this just becomes an equation we're going to solve just like over there. We multiply by 2 to undo the division of 2. So I'm left with 7 plus y equals 2. Use subtraction to get rid of the addition, and y is -5. So the y value of our missing point is -5. And we now have the missing endpoint that we were looking for. So that's basically what you are going to have to do to help find either an endpoint or a midpoint. You're going to use that formula, plug in what you know, and then just find the missing piece.